They laughed at him that day. Not loudly, not openly, but in that quiet way that hurts more than insults. Rahim stood at the edge of the crowded room, holding a thin brown envelope against his chest. Inside it were documents he barely understood, forms, copies, stamps that made his hands shake. Around him, people spoke confidently. Their clothes fit perfectly, their shoes were clean, their voices carried certainty. Rahim's shoes were dusty. His shirt was ironed, but the collar had given up years ago. A man near the front glanced back at him, then whispered something. Another man smiled. A woman covered her mouth to hide a laugh. Rahim noticed everything. He always did. Someone said, "Is he lost?" Another replied, "No, he's just poor." The words were soft, but they landed heavy. Rahim lowered his eyes. He had learned long ago that silence was safer than dignity. This wasn't the first time. It never was. Rahim grew up in a place people avoided talking about, a narrow neighborhood behind the bus terminal where the air smelled of smoke and boiled rice. His home was a single tin room. When it rained, water dripped from the ceiling. When it was hot, sleep became impossible. His father, Karim, pulled a rickshaw every morning before sunrise, every night until his legs shook. His mother cleaned houses where people spoke politely but never learned her name. From the time Rahim was old enough to understand words, he understood one truth. Being poor was not just about money. It was about how people looked at you, or didn't look at you at all. At school, Rahim sat in the back, not because he wanted to, because that was where boys like him were expected to be. His uniform was faded, his shoes were cracked. The other students noticed. They always did. "Hey, Rahim," one boy said once, "do you bring lunch or do you imagine it?" The class laughed. The teacher looked away. Rahim didn't answer. He wrote the question down in his mind. He wrote everything down. Years later, standing in that room with the envelope in his hands, Rahim felt the same feeling, that familiar tightening in the chest, that quiet pressure behind the eyes. They were laughing again. They still thought he didn't matter. What they didn't know was this. This was not the beginning. This was not even the middle. This was just the last time they laughed freely. Because years later, in a courtroom filled with powerful people, that same room would fall silent. Rahim grew up learning to be invisible. At school, he wasn't just poor, he was a target. His shoes squeaked when he walked. His uniform faded under the sun. His books smelled faintly of kerosene and dust. Every morning he entered the classroom with a knot in his stomach. He knew what awaited him. The rich boys at the front whispered jokes about him. They called him names, sometimes cruel, sometimes clever. The teachers sometimes looked, sometimes didn't. Rarely did they stop it. One day, during a math test, a boy knocked Rahim's notebook to the floor. Pages scattered. His pencils rolled across the floor like tiny soldiers fleeing a battle. The classroom erupted into laughter. Rahim bent silently, gathering the pages. He did not fight, he did not cry, he did not speak. He only remembered. At home, life was no easier. His father, Karim, returned from pulling his rickshaw, coughing violently. The rickshaw had carried him to the edge of exhaustion, yet it barely covered the rent. His mother tried to keep the small home together. Every evening she washed floors and clothes for families who never noticed her. One evening, Karim collapsed on the wooden floor. Rahim rushed to him. His father's breathing was shallow, uneven. He tried to lift him, tried to call for help. The neighbors shook their heads. "Nothing we can do," they said. The hospital demanded money up front. Rahim's pockets held nothing. His parents had nothing. By the time the doctors finally took Kareem in, it was too late. Rahim sat beside his father's body that night. He listened to his mother cry quietly so the neighbors wouldn't complain. He learned another truth. The world does not pause for grief. The next morning, the landlord knocked. "Rent," he said. "Now." There was no pause, no mercy. Rahim did not speak. He did not protest. He only understood. Silence was safer. It was all he had. From that day, school became irrelevant. Dreams were put aside. Education paused. The world was a place of harsh lessons, and Rahim had just learned the hardest one. Life does not care who laughs, who cries, or who silently
Rahim
suffers.
left school behind, but life did not let him rest. He walked the streets each morning, looking for work. Construction sites, warehouses, night shifts, anywhere he could earn a few coins. At first, no one believed in him. "They'll call you," they said. But the calls never came. Doors closed silently before he could step in. Sometimes a security guard would stop him. "Staff entrance is around the back," they would say. Rahim would nod, walk, and never complain. He learned quickly, anger changes nothing. But memory and patience could shape the future. He lived in a tiny rented room, barely big enough for a mattress and a chair. He cooked simple meals on a small stove. Rice, vegetables, sometimes lentils. Nothing fancy, nothing wasted. His friends had moved on. Some had college degrees, some had jobs in offices with polished floors. But Rahim had something they did not: determination forged in silence. Every night, after long shifts, he would sit by a dim light and read. Law books, contracts, cases of injustice. The world that had taken his father laughed at his childhood and mocked his poverty. He studied it quietly, like a student preparing for war. One evening, rain fell heavily. He was walking home when he saw an old man struggling with a broken-down car. Most people walked past. Rahim did not. He offered help. They spoke briefly. The man was sharp, observant, and unlike anyone Rahim had met. "Why help me?" the man asked. "Because someone should," Rahim replied. Before leaving, the man handed him a card. "If you ever want to study again, call me," he said. Rahim kept it, folding it into his wallet. Years later, that card would mark the first step toward the life he had only dared to imagine. By day, he worked. By night, he studied. No celebrations, no announcements, just progress, just patience, just silence. And in that silence, Rahim was slowly preparing for a reckoning the world had yet to see. Rahim held the card in his hand for weeks before daring to call. The man on the other end of the line spoke kindly but firmly. "You want to learn? Come tomorrow. Bring your determination. Nothing else matters." The next morning, Rahim stepped into a small office filled with books. Tall shelves of law books, documents stacked in corners, cases of injustice, some decades old. He felt out of place. He had never seen paper so clean or words so organized. But the man, Mr. Harris, looked at him not with pity, but with expectation. "You will start with the basics," Harris said. "Contracts, property laws, labor rights. Every injustice you've suffered, every insult you've remembered, it all begins with understanding the law." By day, Rahim continued his labor work to survive. By night, he studied relentlessly. The dim light of his tiny room illuminated textbooks, notebooks, and scribbled notes. He read court rulings of people who had been poor, powerless, and mocked. He studied cases of revenge, justice, and redemption. Each story planted a seed of knowledge in his mind. It was not easy. Mistakes happened. Sometimes he fell asleep over a book, only to wake with a cramp in his neck. Sometimes hunger gnawed, and he went to bed with an empty stomach. But he never gave up. Every night he whispered to himself, "I will not be powerless. I will not be invisible." Weeks turned into months, months into years. Rahim grew stronger, smarter, more observant. He learned to see the cracks in people's lies, to notice what they ignored, to remember every insult, every humiliation, every injustice. And he learned the most important lesson of all. Silence is not weakness. Silence is strategy. Silence can listen, remember, and strike when the time is right. Rahim's first small victory came unexpectedly. A neighbor complained of being cheated by a local contractor. Rahim offered to review the contract. He found discrepancies. The contractor tried to intimidate him. Rahim didn't yell, he didn't confront. He presented the evidence calmly. The neighbor got the contract corrected. The contractor learned that Rahim could not be ignored. It was small, but for Rahim, it was proof. Proof that knowledge, patience, and silence together were more powerful than any mockery he had endured. It started with a letter. A local community was being forced off their land. Their homes were small, their voices quieter than the wind. A powerful company claimed ownership, backed by lawyers, money, and influence. Rahim read the complaint carefully. Every detail mattered. Every signature, every date, every clause. He remembered his father, the landlord, the neighborhood. Every insult, every humiliation. He knew this was more than just a case. This was the beginning of the reckoning he had been preparing for all his life. The courtroom was imposing. High ceilings, polished wood, judges in black robes, silent but formidable. When Rahim entered, a few people noticed him. "Is that the slum boy?" a lawyer whispered. Another laughed softly. Not enough for the judge to notice, but enough to sting. Rahim said nothing. He simply placed his papers on the table and waited. Days turned into weeks. Witnesses testified. Executives denied claims. Lawyers argued loudly, trying to overpower truth with words. Rahim listened. He asked simple, precise questions. Dates, documents, contradictions. Each answer tightened the web of evidence. Each lie began to unravel. The courtroom grew quieter with each session. Whispers faded. Eyes shifted. Even the most confident smiled nervously. Rahim remained silent outside the courtroom. No boasting, no announcements, just preparation for the next day, the next question, the next witness. At night, he would sit alone, reviewing evidence. The faces of the powerful who once laughed at him were etched in his memory. Every sneer, every insult, every mocking glance fueled his resolve. He understood one undeniable truth. The courtroom is not just a place of law. It is a place of patience, strategy, and silence, and he had mastered all three. The courtroom was quiet, but not calm. Executives shifted in their seats. Lawyers whispered nervously to each other. The judge raised an eyebrow, sensing the unusual focus in the room. Rahim walked to the evidence table, every step measured, every breath controlled. He placed the first folder on the table, documents neatly stacked, organized, impossible to ignore. Your Honor, these records showed discrepancies in the company's property claims. Dates don't match, signatures are forged. The room went still. Even the murmurs stopped. He continued, calmly, presenting each piece of evidence: contracts, receipts, photographs, testimonies. No yelling, no dramatics, just facts. The executives exchanged glances. Sweat formed at their temples. A lawyer tried to interrupt. Rahim looked at him, paused, waited. The lawyer's voice faltered. He realized Rahim's calm was not weakness, it was precision. With every folder Rahim presented, the atmosphere shifted. The courtroom was no longer a place of laughter. It had become a place of realization. The same people who had mocked him in his youth, the ones who thought he was insignificant, now felt a creeping unease. Rahim didn't gloat, he didn't smile. He let the silence speak. Every pause between words, every deliberate gesture was louder than any shouting could have been. By the third day, the tension was palpable. Witnesses stumbled under his questions. Lawyers began second-guessing their own arguments. Even the judge leaned forward intrigued, impressed by the methodical approach of the quiet young man from a poor neighborhood. Silence, Rahim knew, was a weapon, and today it was sharper than a sword.
The final day arrived. The courtroom was filled with an air of expectation. Journalists, lawyers, and the powerful executives all watched. Rahim entered, calm, composed. He placed the last folder of evidence on the table. "This," he said, "is the complete record of all discrepancies, forged signatures, and misappropriations. Every claim made by the defendants contradicts these documents." A hush fell over the room. Even the murmurs of the lawyers stopped. Executives shifted nervously. For the first time, the power they had wielded for years felt uncertain. Witness after witness had been carefully questioned. Rahim's strategy had been simple: observe, listen, let silence trap the lies. And it had worked. The lead lawyer for the company rose. He tried to argue, but every statement Rahim had documented was airtight. The courtroom tension was unbearable. Every eye fixed on the judge, every breath held. Rahim did not speak unnecessarily. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The room itself seemed to lean in, waiting for the inevitable. Part 8. The verdict. The judge leaned forward, reading the documents carefully. Silence filled the room. Finally, the gavel struck. Guilty. Prison sentences were handed down. Compensation was ordered for the families whose lives had been destroyed. The powerful executives sat frozen. No laughter, no sneers, no clever words. They understood finally what Rahim had carried with him all these years. Silence was more powerful than mockery. Patience more powerful than rage. Knowledge more powerful than ignorance. Rahim sat quietly. He didn't cheer. He didn't smile. He simply remembered every insult, every humiliation, every moment of injustice, and felt a calm satisfaction. Part 9. Aftermath and Legacy. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded around him. "Why didn't you fight back sooner?" one asked. Rahim replied calmly, "Because silence listens, and when it speaks, it ends arguments." He used his earnings to build a small school in his neighborhood, named it after his parents. The children there would grow up learning, strength is quiet, justice can be achieved patiently, mockery has no power over those who are prepared. Those who had laughed at him never forgot, not because he shouted, not because he fought in anger, but because silence had delivered its verdict. Some people shout to be heard. Others stay quiet and change everything. If you believe silence has power, like, comment, and subscribe to Verdict After Silence, because sometimes the loudest victories are heard in complete silence.